the showcase of the overall research process. So we'll discuss the description of the thesis proposal and components of thesis proposal, both in the field research and in the biblical research. I have a slide and then I will present. Yeah. Okay, this is a main thesis proposal workshop. We will discuss the overall parts of this proposal and sorry. Okay, so the research description, uh, since we have two lines of studies here in Shiloh International Theological Seminary, in the biblical studies and in the Master of Divinity. We know that one. So, for you have the biblical background in your first degree, you are expected to do biblical study research. Whereas, when you have non-biblical background, you are expected to do non-biblical research. It doesn't mean that it doesn't include the biblical part of or it doesn't mean that it doesn't account it doesn't have or it doesn't categorize biblical verses and biblical passages. Rather, its nature of study is different from that of the biblical research. So the biblical research, your main focus is on the biblical text, whereas in Master of Divinity, you have been expected to go to the problem area or in order to affirm or in order to confirm the given biblical grounds have been implemented or not. That's so your study area will be different. It may be in your church, it may be in the society, in the believing community, and so on. So that is the nature of the biblical both parts of these researches. So biblical research, your main focus is biblical text, whereas that of Master of Divinity lines, your main focus is on the practical application of biblical patterns, whether in the church or not, whether in the society or in the believing community. So the goal is to demonstrate the academic ability to explore a topic in depth, interact with the scholarly work, and sustain an argument supporting a thesis statement. So the goal of your overall research is how do you engage or how do you explore the given gap, we call it a research gap, and then how do you support your argument by exploring in depth and interact with scholarly works. So this is one of the criteria of the research, whether in the proposal stage or in your full research. You are expected to defend your research or your argument. So in doing so, you have expected to analyze different scholarly works explore in depth that area. And this is what you have been expected to evaluate different literatures and to engage with the scholarly arguments and to identify the strengths and weakness of these components, their works, and so on. This paper must reflect individuality of thought and relevant to Ethiopian context. So it must show the individuality. That means ሌላ ቦታ ያልሰራችሁት እና ሌላ ቦታ ሰሚት ያላረጋችሁት መሆን አለ። ስለዚህ በአጠቃላይ ሪሰርች ዲስክሪፕሽናችን በሁለት መስመር ልትሰሩ ትችላላችሁ። የመጀመሪያው መስመር ቢብሊካል ስተዲ መስመር ነው። ቢብሊካል ስተዲ አንድ የመጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ክፍል ትወስዱና ያንን ክፍል ዴሊሜት አድርጋችሁ እዛ ክፍል ላይ የተለያዩ አንደርስታንዲንጎች አሉ፣ የተለያዩ መረዳቶች ይኖራሉ። እኛ ብቻ አይደለም ቢብሊካል ማለት መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ የምናጠናው ሌሎችም ሰዎች ያጠናሉ። ስለዚህ ያንን ክፍል በተለየ መነጽር በተለየ መረዳት ሌሎች ስኮላሮች ያላዩዋቸው ነገሮች ማሳየት መቻል አለባችሁ ማለት ነው። አዲስ ሌቭል አትሊስት አዲስ ሌቭል አዲስ ነገር አዲስ እይታ ወይንም ደግሞ የሌሎችን ስራ ሊሆን ይችላል ክሪቲካሊ ኢቫሉዌት የምታደርጉት። ስለዚህ እዛ ክፍል ላይ ያለውን ሀሳብ ተወስዱና በኋላ ላይ በምሳሌ እንመጣበታለን። ያንን ክፍል በዛ መልኩ ሪሰርች ወደ ሪሰርች አይዲያ እንቀይረዋለን ማለት ነው። ሌላው ይሄ ለመጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ባክግራውንዳችሁ መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ የመጀመሪያ ዲግሪያችሁ መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ላይ ከሆነ ወይንም ደግሞ ሶስት ዓመት ድረስ ቆያችሁ you have similarities ከሁለት አንዱ ልትሰሩ ትችላላችሁ። ለምን 60 ክሬዲት አወር ነው ቢብሊካል ስተዲ ያው ታውቃላችሁ። ይሄንን ስትመዘገቡ ጀምሮ ስለምታውቁ ብዬ ነው። ኤምዲም ደግሞ 90 ክሬዲት አወር ነው። ያው በኮመን ኮርሶችን ተሰጥቷቸው እኩል እንዲሆኑ ታስቦ ነው። ስለዚህ አዚስ ሌቭል በመረጣችሁበት ፊልድ ወይም በመረጣችሁበት ላይን የመረጣችሁትን የሪሰርች መንገድ ተጠቅማችሁ መስራት ትችላላችሁ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ምርጫው የእናንተ ነው። ግን ምን ያክል መሆን አለበት? you are expected to write 18,000 not 80,000 18,000 up to 20,000 words. The word count ነው የሚለካው። It must exclude the bibliographic, right? It is inevitable to include the in-text citation. Yeah, footnote እና in-text citationን ጨምሮ ነገር ግን ቢብሊዮግራፊውን ሳይጨምር ከ18,000 እስከ 20,000 የቃላት መጠን ያለው ለዛ የሚሆን ፕሮፖዛል ነው ማለት ነው። አሁን ከፕሮፖዛል ስቴጅ ስለምንነሳ ለዛ የሚሆን ታሳቢ ያንን የሚያክል የወርድ ሊሚት ላለው ቴሲስ ታስቦ የሚዘጋጅ ፕሮፖዛል ነው ማለት ነው። በዋናነት ከስኮላርሊ ወርልድ ጋራ ያላችሁ ክሪቲካል ኢቫሉዌሽን የምታሳዩበት ነው ማለት ነው። ያላችሁን መረዳት በተለይ ስለዛ ጉዳይ ያላችሁን ዴፕዝ የምታስረዱበት ነው ማለት ነው ፕሮፖዛል ስንል። ጥያቄ ካላችሁ በኋላ መጨረሻ ላይ ያዙና መጠየቅ ይቻላል። What is the proposal? Proposal is every theological research or research project should begin with a proposal. The research proposal is a document that outlines how you propose to undertake your research studies. This is your roadmap of your project, your research project. So the proposal must show that how you propose to undertake your research studies. እንዴት ነው ሪሰርች ልክ አንድን ቤት ከመስራታችሁ በፊት ፕላን እንደምታወጡ ሁሉ ወይም አንድ አናጢ ያንን ቤት ለመስራት መጀመሪያ ፕላን እንደሚያወጣ ሁሉ ይህንንም ሪሰርቻችሁን ለመስራት የምታቅዱበት ነው ማለት ነው። It must be conceptual framework and practical plan ሊተገበር የሚገባ መሆን አለበት። ያ ማለት በሪሰርች ኮሚቴ ሲጸድቅ እናንተ ስለዛ ጉዳይ ያላችሁንም መረዳት ጭምር ነው የሚያሳየው ማለት ነው። So outline not only the subject of the investigation but also the procedures through which the study will be conducted. መጠናት ያለበትን ብቻ ሳይሆን እንዴት እንደሚጠና ፕሮሲጀሩንም ጭምር ቅደም ተከተሉንም ጭምር ማሳየት አለባችሁ ማለት ነው። So it essentially outline what you will research and how you will research it. What you will research it, how you will research it. So this is what does that mean proposal. Before you write test proposal, it must be approved by the panel of experts. So in this thesis proposal is the ground for work for the research you have been planning to do. And in theological studies, the research is grounded in the hermeneutical, historical, and theological methods. We will discuss that one before. በኋላ የምናነሳቸው ጉዳዮች ናቸው እነዚህ። Okay. So it clarifies the research problem, demonstrates the necessity of the study, and establishes its feasibility within a given academic context. It must demonstrate the research problem. It must be problem focused. ችግር ከሌለማ ፕሮፖዛል መስራት አያስፈልግም። So problem oriented መሆን አለበት ማለት ነው። So we'll discuss that one. የትኛው ኮምፖነንት ላይ ነው ፕሮብሌሙን ስቴት የምናደርገው እያንዳንዱን ክፍል በደንብ ለያይተን ማየት አለብን ማለት ነው። So anyway, the research is grounded in sound hermeneutical, historical, and theological method. We know that we know biblical methodologies. Then how do we apply the applied research using that biblical methodologies? Or else ሁለቱን ሜቶዶሎጂዎች እንዴት አድርገን መጠቀም እንችላለን? ወይም ደግሞ ቢብሊካል ስተዲስ ሜቶዶሎጂዎቹ የትኞቹ ናቸው? ፕራክቲካል ቲዮሎጂ ወይም ፕራክቲካል ፊልድ ወርክ ላይ ሄደን የምንሰራቸው ስራዎችስ የትኞቹን ሜቶዶሎጂ ይጠቀማል የሚለውን ነገር እንደዚሁ እናያለን ማለት ነው። So the research problem demonstrates the necessity of the study and its feasibility within a given academic context. So a strong proposal, it is beyond a general topic to present a focused research question and defensible thesis direction. This critical engagement with the biblical text, canonical tradition, and relevant scholarly debate, solid foundation for the entire study, ensuring coherent academic rigor and scholarly credibility throughout the research process. የአንድ ጠንካራ ሪሰርች ፕሮፖዛል ባህሪው ምንድን ነው? ቶፒክ ብቻ ፕሬዘንት ማድረግ በቂ አይደለም። So it is beyond stating the topic or beyond stating the general topic. It must have targeted problem, or we call it that research gap. So unless you have research gap, it is impossible to say the relevant or to affirm the relevance of that proposal. So you must be focused, and that focus must be stated in the research question, not only in the research question in you rationally, in different parts of your component of your proposal, it must be stated clearly. So strong research proposal must be focused. Focused means it is not a general statement. It must be specific. Specific, and its focus is limited to a certain area, a certain research field. So ያንን ነው ፎከስ ማድረግ ያለብን ማለት ነው። So solid foundation for the entire study, ensuring coherence, academic rigor, and scholarly credibility throughout the research process. We'll discuss that part later. Okay, the first thing is that we must have, of course, it must be ልናሻክለው እንችላለን በተለያየ ደረጃ እየሰራን ስንሄድ። ነገር ግን at least what does that mean? Proposal title. Proposal title, it is not mere topic. It must be problem oriented. Unless you have a specific problem, your study lacks focus. So it must be focused and it must be problem oriented. So you must wrestle with the topic until you find a question about the topic and that solves a problem. So it must show that you have been ready to solve a specific problem in a certain area, in a certain delimited area. That is, that must have focused, or this proposal title must be focused. It must be concise statement that reflects the central problem, scope, and direction of the study. So, what is that central problem? It must be a statement of central problem. When you give a title, then you must be careful about your weight of the words. Your weight of words have significance. So you must be selective. And የቃላቶቻችሁ ክብደት ይወስነዋል። በጣም የተመረጡ ቃላቶችን ተጠቅማችሁ በምሳሌ እንመለከተዋለን። ቃላቶቻችሁን በደንብ ሴሌክቲቭ ማድረግ አለባችሁ ማለት ነው። So effective research proposal begins with a general subject in a narrow into clearly defendable problems that can be critically investigated. How do you develop a specific proposal? A proposal title in general, you know. What precisely do you want to find out, and why this is? Before going to this, I must give a specific title, sample research title. Okay, first of all, for example, look the title of this research. This is a sample proposal title. The nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus. An exegetical analysis of Mark 9:38 up to 41. So my title is, it has solid ይሄ ቃላቶችን መረጣዎችን ብዙ ትርጉም ሊያስተላልፉ የሚሸከሙ ብዙ ትርጉሞች ያሉት ማለት ያ ማለት ብዙ ሎዶች ለምሳሌ እዚህ ጋር ተመልከቱ። The nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus. So መጀመሪያ አንድ ሰው ይሄንን ርዕስ ሲያነብ what is the nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus? ይሄንን ጥያቄ ይጠይቃል። What look like the inclusive mission of Jesus? What is its nature? So this is the nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus. So my proposal title is focused. My proposal title is one of the criteria for this proposal title is it must reflect the central problem. It must reflect the central problem. So there must be a problem, there must be a gap, research gap. So there is different understanding regarding the inclusive mission of Jesus in that specific text, biblical text. So that is, and then the scope is already stated. The scope is not anything else. It is boundary. The boundary is in Mark 9, 38 up to 41. So we have this boundary. We call it a delimitation. This boundary is self-imposed boundaries. So we call this is delimitation. So not only that, the title is also, it is methodological and exegetical analysis of Mark 9, 38 up to 41. So the methodology is already clearly stated here. This is an exegetical analysis. But which type of exegetical method or biblical method we will discuss that one in the methodology part. So at least it is methodology indicated. So my title is ግልጽ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለማጠናው ነገር በግልጽ ይናገራል ማለት ነው። ኦኬ እንቀጥል። ስለዚህ wrestle with the topic until you find a question about the topic that solves the problem. አንድ ችግር ለመፍታት የተዘጋጀ መሆን አለበት ማለት ነው። ሶ አንድ ችግር ለመፍታት ሬዲ ነው ማለት ነው። when you እስቲ ስለ ፊልድ ሪሰርች ደግሞ ሄደን አንድ ኤግዛምፕል እንመልከት። አንድ ፊልድ ሪሰርች ቶፒክ the role of youth in evangelism, a case study of selected churches in Addis Ababa. Now, እስቲ ኢቫሉዌት እናድርገው the role of youth in evangelism. So problem oriented ነው፣ gap oriented ነው። ሜቶዶሎጂው በግልጽ ይታወቃል። a case study of selected church in Addis Ababa. ሜቶዶሎጂው በግልጽ ይታወቃል። ባውንደሪው በግልጽ ይታወቃል። ወይንም ሰልፍ ኢምፖዝድ ባውንደሪያችን በግልጽ ይታወቃል። what is the role of youth in evangelism? So the role of youth in evangelism ሁሉም ቦታ ላይ አይደለም፣ በመላው ዓለም ላይ አይደለም፣ በአፍሪካ ውስጥ አይደለም፣ በመላ ኢትዮጵያ አይደለም፣ ወይም ደግሞ በተወሰኑ ቸርቾች ውስጥ ብቻ ነው ማለት ነው። ሶ ግልጽ ነው ማለት ነው። the role of youth in the evangelism it must be stated from general to specific ነው ማለት ነው። ስለ አንድ ጉዳይ ፎከስድ ነው ማለት ነው። ታይትሉ ፎከስድ ነው፣ ብሮድ አይደለም። ኦኬ so how do we develop ምሳሌዎችን እየሰጠን እንደዚህ እንቀጥላለን። ከምሳሌ ጋር ካልሆነ በደንብ እንረዳ ግልጽ አይደለም ማለት ነው። ሶሪ ስታክ አድርጎ እሺ። Okay, how do you develop a specific proposal? First of all, identify your need. How do you want to find out? What is this knowledge significant? What precisely do you want to find out? So just ፍላጎታችሁ በደንብ ውስጣችሁ ላይ ያለውን መሻት ውስጣችሁ ላይ ያለውን ችግር ፈቺ ሐሳብ ምንድነው ፍላጎታችሁ? Identify your interest of studies. What aspect of the biblical study fascinates you the most? Do you enjoy textual analysis, historical context, theological debate, or practical application? So, if you have been your talent, if you have been ወደዚህ ሐሳብ የምትሳቡ ወይም ለዚህ ሐሳብ ከሆነ ውስጣችሁ ያለው ነገር እሱን መለየት ነው። So you are expected to study the biblical studies. Do you have enjoyed textual analysis, historical context, theological debate, or practical application? So you are expected to study biblical researches. So review the existing research. So in order to review this existing research, read academic journals, theses, and books on the biblical study. You have the access on the academia.edu, or else you have the access in Z library if you have created the account ካላችሁ Z library ውስጥም ገብታችሁ ማግኘት ትችላላችሁ። ሌሎችም ዌብሳይቶች አሉ። So first of all ከዛ ሪሰርቻችሁ የሚሆኑ ማቴሪያሎችን መሰብሰብ ነው። ሪሶርስ መኖሩን እና አለመኖሩን እርግጠኛ መሆን አለባችሁ። ስለዚህ ሐሳባችሁን በምን ታዳብራላችሁ ማለት ነው። እነዚህ የሊትሬቸር ፓርቶች በአቅራቢያችሁ መኖሩን እና በአክሰስ መኖሩን እርግጠኛ መሆን አለባችሁ። ለምን ከዚህ ሐሳብ ጋር ነው ለሶስት ወር ያህል ጊዜ የምትቆዩት። So identify gaps in research or areas needing further exploration. So ይሄን ስታደርጉ የበለጠ ጥናት የሚፈልገው ክፍል የትኛው ነው? ለምሳሌ አንድ ሴክሽን ላይ አንድ ክፍል ላይ ብዙ አይነት መረዳቶች ሊኖሩ ይችላሉ። ብዙ አይነት ጉዳዮች ኢንፋሳይዝ ተደርገው ሊሆን ይችላል። ነገር ግን የበለጠ ሪሰርች የሚያስፈልገው ጉዳይ ምንድን ነው? ስታክ እያደረገ ተቸግሮኝ ነው። ይሰማል እንዴ ድምጼ?
ይሰማል።
ሄሎ Identify gaps in the research or areas needing further exploration. በአንድ ክፍል ውስጥ ብዙ አይነት ጉዳዮች ሊነሱ ይችላሉ። ነገር ግን የበለጠ ትኩረት የሚፈልገው ጉዳይ የበለጠ ጥናት የሚፈልገው ጉዳይ የትኛው ነው ብሎ በደንብ ማየቱ በጣም ጠቃሚ ነው። ሩቅ ያስጉዘናል ማለት ነው። ስኮፓችንን ይወስናል። Consider your skill and resources. Do you have the knowledge of Greek or Aramaic or for textual analysis? በእርግጥ ሁላችንም ግሪክ አፍ መፍቻ ቋንቋችን አይደለም። ነገር ግን ቢያንስ የግሪክን ቋንቋ በተለይ አዲስ ኪዳን ላይ ከሆነ የምንሰራው አንዳንድ ከግሪክኛ ጋር የሚገናኙ የግሪክ አናላይሲስ የሚፈልጉ ጉዳዮች በተለይ ቻፕተር 4 ላይ ቴክስቹዋል አናላይሲስ ላይ ያንን ተመርኩዘን ብዙ አይነት መረዳቶችን እዛ ክፍል ላይ እንዳለ የምናሳይበት ነው ማለት ነው። አትሊስት ለግሪክ ያለን ኔጌቲቭ መሆን የለበትም አቲቲዩዳችን። ምንም እንኳን ግሪክኛውን ሊረሳን ይችላል፣ ነገር ግን በማንበብ ማካካስ እንደምንችል ማመን አለብን ማለት ነው። ሶ ቴክስቹዋል አናላይሲስ ግዴታ ግሪክን ይፈልጋል፣ ግሪክ ኮንሰፕት ይፈልጋል። ምናልባት ደግሞ ኦልድ ቴስታመንት ላይ ደግሞ የምንሰራ ከሆነ የሂብሩ ቋንቋ ወሳኝ ነው። ነገር ግን እነዚህ አሁን የቋንቋ ባሪየሮች ኦልሞስት ኤአይ ከመጣ በኋላ እየተሰበሩ ያለበት ሁኔታ ስላለ አይ ቲንክ ለዚህ ጉዳይ ኦፕን ማድረግ ነው ያለባችን እንጂ ግሪክኛ ወይም ሂብሩ ስለማልችል ወይም ስለማልረዳ ይህንን አለመስራት አልችልም ማለት አንችልም ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ መጀመሪያ ኢንትረስታችሁን መለየት አለባችሁ። ከዛ በኋላ ሪሶርሳችሁን ደግሞ በተለያየ መንገድ መሰብሰብ ይቻላል ማለት ነው። ሪሶርስ ስንሰበስብ ቅድም የተናገርኩት ነገር አለ። አካዳሚያ.ኢዲዩ ላይ ገብተን የተለያዩ ጆርናሎችን ልናይ እንችላለን። በዛ ላይ የተሰሩ ቴሲሶች አሉ። ስለዚህ እዛ ገብተን ከኛ ከመረጥነው ርዕስ ጋር የሚመሳሰሉ ሪሰርቾች አሉ። እነዛ ሪሰርቾች ገብተን እናነባለን ማለት ነው። የኛ ሪሰርች ደግሞ ምንድነው ዩኒክ የሚያደርገው? አንድ ዩኒክ የሆነ ነገር እነሱ ያላዩት ነገር ግን እናንተ ያያችሁት አንድ የሪሰርች ጋፕ አይደንቲፋይ ማድረግ መቻል አለባችሁ ማለት ነው። እንደዛ ስታደርጉ በተለይ ግሪክ ሌሎችንም ሂብሩ ያው ኤክሰጀሲስ ኦንላይን እየተማርን ስላለን እነዛን ሞር ምን ነገሮችን ማየት እንዳለብን በደንብ እናያለን ማለት ነው። ለማንኛውም እዚሁ ግሪክ የተማራችሁ ሪሰርቻችሁን መስራታችሁ ጠቀሜታ አለ። ለማንኛውም ምንድነው ጋፕ መለየት አለባችሁ ነው። ላይ ያለ ጋፕ ምን አይነት ጋፕ ኦሪየንትድ መሆን አለበት ማለት ነው። መት ጋፕ ኦሪየንትድ discuss with your advisor and professors. ይሄ I think አሁን ያላችሁበት ስቴጅ ታይትል መጣችኋል። most likely you have selected the research title, then ያ ሪሰርች ታይትል ሪፋይን ተደርጎ አጀስት ተደርጎ ለእናንተው ይቀርባል። ጥያቄ ካላችሁ ከአድቫይዘሮቻችሁ ጋር መነጋገር ይቻላል። ከነዚሁ ከሪሰርች ዲፓርትመንት ጋራም እንደዚሁ መነጋገር ይቻላል ማለት ነው። narrow your topic. We have already discussed what does that mean. Narrowing your topic. Topic is researchable and relevant. Researchable መሆኑን ማረጋገጥ አለባችሁ and so on. The first component of your proposal must be the statement of the problem. Statement of the problem constitutes the core of the research proposal, as it clearly defines the central issues that the study seeks to investigate and resolve. Typically, Okay. The statement of the problem, it clearly defines the central issues that the study seeks to investigate and resolve. Statement of the problem, as the name indicates, it is stating your research gap or stating your problem under investigation. It demonstrates its significance. Before that, it typically identifies gap in knowledge and unresolved questions or ambiguous situations that require scholarly attention. It must be gap oriented. The gap may be in knowledge, or maybe it may be a resolved question, but it may be ambiguous situation. ክፍሉ ላይ ወይንም ያንን ስቴት የምታደርጉት ችግር ስለዛ ምን አይነት ጋፕ ነው ጋፑ የተፈጠረው የት ነው? ዛት ዊዝን ቸርች ክፍሉን አፕላይ በሚደረግበት ቦታ ነው ወይንስ በናውሌጅ ጋፕ ነው? ልትሞሉት የታሰበው ጋፕ የትኛውን ጋፕ ነው ነባቸው? ሶ ስቴትመንት ኦፍ ዘ ፕሮብሌም it must state the problem gap and it must state also the nature of the gap. Nature of gap ምንድን ነው? So demonstrate significant and relevance with the field, and valid research problem must be worthy of academic investigation and capable of contributing meaningful to scholarship. According to Kibe, effective research begins with compiling and clearly defined problems that invites critical inquiry and leads to substantive conclusion. It requires move from a general issue to a specific research question or conceptual concern. Strong statement of the problem justifies the necessity of the study by identifying gaps, inconsistencies in existing literature, thereby laying a solid foundation for rigorous theological research. Just, I will give example. Look this one. The study focuses on controversies surrounding the definition and horizon of discipleship as presented in the Gospel of Mark. So it is not it must be stated from general to specific. So I have started from the controversy, just በቀጥታ ወደ ጉዳዩ መግባት አለባቸው። Study focus on the controversies surrounding the definition and horizon of discipleship. The inclusion of, as my title says, the nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus. The nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus. So the study focuses on the controversy surrounding the definition and horizon of discipleship as presented in the Gospel of Mark. Throughout the Markan narrative, the disciples persistently misunderstanding of Jesus' mission and authority is evident. Now, to the specific exegesis የሚያስፈልገው ክፍል ወይም ሪሰርች የሚያስፈልገው ክፍል ወይም ጋፕ ያለበት ክፍል Mark 9:38-41. So in Mark 9:38-41, this misunderstanding manifests a clear conflict because ክፍሉ ላይ ክሊር የሆነ ኮንፍሊክት እንዳለ እንመለከታለን። Specifically, the disciples attempt to stop an individual from outside their group upon seeing him casting out demons in Jesus. በደቀ መዛሙርቱ ልብ ውስጥ ያለው በከኛ ወገን ስላልሆነ በስሙ በክርስቶስ ስም አጋንንት ማስወጣት አይችልም የሚል ነው። ነገር ግን ጌታችን አትከልክሉ ሲል እንመለከተዋለን። So there is a tension between Jesus' redefinition of the scope of discipleship and the disciples and the misunderstanding of the extent of discipleship. So እንዲህ አይነት ችግር የተፈጠረበት ምክንያቱ ለምንድን ነው ጌታችን ሪዲፋይን ማድረግ ያስፈልገው? ኔቸሩ ምን አይነት ይመስላል ታዲያ? ሪዲፋይን ማድረግ ብቻም ሳይሆን ምን አይነት ኔቸር አለው? So the primary research problem arises from the tension between the disciples and institutional exclusivity. ከኛ ወገን ስላልሆነ ነው አይደል? So the question is not the ሌላ ሳይሆን institutional exclusivity and Jesus' missional inclusivity. So while the disciple restricts the boundaries of disciples to the group population, Jesus associates those these boundaries with acting in his name, acting in my name. This situation raises the critical question: by what standard is the true discipleship is measured? So, ስለዚህ የዲሳይፕልሺፕ የደቀ መዝሙርነት ምንድን ነው ታዲያ መለኪያው የሚል ጥያቄ ያስነሳል። Although much has been written regarding discipleship remark, it has become necessary to conduct a deep exegetical analysis demonstrating how this passage reinterprets the legitimacy of spiritual authority and the legitimacy of discipleship. The study seeks to bridge the gap. Now, I have what type of gap between the institutional membership and missional engagement. So this is a misunderstanding. So even ሁለተኛውን ምሳሌዎችን የቀያየርኩኝ እጠቀማለሁኝ። ሁለቱም አንደኛው በቢብሊካል ሪሰርች፣ አንደኛው ደግሞ ፊልድ ሪሰርች ነው ማለት ነው። Statement of although yours constitute a substantial portion of church membership, their involvement in evangelical activities remains inconsistent and often limited. In many churches in Addis Ababa, yours participation primarily restricted to internal programs and worship, following fellowship and social events with minimal engagement in world mission. This situation raises critical questions regarding the effectiveness of current youth ministry approach in the fostering evangelical involvement. Anyway, the problem, the problem is therefore lies in the disconnect between the organizational potential of youth in the evangelism and their actual involvement in practice. This study aims to investigate the issue and propose strategies for enhancing youth participation in evangelistic ministry. So it has a clear gap. አንድ ፕሮብሌምን ለመፍታት የተዘጋጀ እንደሆነ በግልጽ ያሳያል ማለት ነው። ሶ ፕሮብሌም ስቴትመንት ነው ስንል ስቴቲንግ ዘ ፕሮብሌም ክሊርሊ ሶ ኢቫሉዌት ስናደርግ ስትሮንግ ስቴትመንት ኦፍ ፕሮብሌም ጀስቲፋይስ ዘ ኔሴሲቲ ኦፍ ዘ ስተዲ ባይ አይደንቲፋይንግ ጋፕስ ኦር ኢንኮንሲስተንሲስ ኢን ዘ ኤግዚስቲንግ ሊትሬቸር, thereby laying a solid foundation for the rigorous theological research. At least it identifies the gaps, inconsistencies. Okay. The other thing is that rationality of the study. The rationale of the study explains the significance of the research topic and justifies why it requires scholarly investigation, particularly within a specific academic and socio-cultural context. ለምን አስፈለገ ሪሰርቻችሁ? It must have clear connection between identified research problem and broader implication. Yeah, it must be both purposeful and contextually grounded. Furthermore, the rationale function as a bridge between the problem statement and the proposed solution by clarifying how the researcher intends to address identified gaps and what contributions the study aims to make. So, ምን አይነት ኮንትሪቢሽን ያንን ችግር በመፈታቱ ምን አይነት ኮንትሪቢሽን ያደርጋል? አንደኛው ራሽናል ላይ የሚካተተው ሀሳብ እሱ ነው። በዋናነት ራሽናል ዲፌንድ የምታደርጉትን ሀሳብ ከፕሮብሌም ስቴትመንቱ ጋር አስማምቶ ያለውን ጋፕ እንዲሁ ጠቅሶ ለቤተክርስቲያን ወይንም ለአካዳሚክ ወይም ለሶሳይቲው ያለውን ኮንትሪቢሽን ሲግኒፊካንስ የሚጠቀስበት ክፍል ነው። ኦኬ ዚስ ኢዝ ራሽናል። ሶ በምሳሌ እንመልከተው። ራሽናሊ ብዙ ጊዜ ፊልድ ሪሰርች ላይ ሳይሆን ያ ፊልድ ሪሰርች ስል አንደርስታንድ አድርጉ ከቢብሊካል ስተዲ ውጪ ማለት ነው። For example, if you see this rational theological unit concept of discipleship developed in the Gospel of Mark is rooted in the person of Jesus and his mission. One of the most striking aspects of Mark's Gospel is portrayal of Jesus' disciples as often misunderstood to the context that they often fail to understand the ministry of Jesus. More or less, it is similar to problem statement, but it must the claim tends to put unknown exorcist. It has claim. One of the unique feature of rational is the claim. So claim አለው ማለት ነው። በኋላ ላይ claim ቴስት ስቴትመንታችን ላይ ምን ማለት እንደሆነ በደንብ እንመለከተዋል። The claim tends to put unknown exorcists as synchronistic, believing on whom simply used Jesus' name for pragmatic reason. This leads to end with two conflict kingdom dichotomy and challenges to anyone who acts in accordance with Jesus' mandate by differing view of spiritual authority. This feature is therefore significant to offer biblical reading of how authority legitimates are reconfigured within the inclusive mission of Jesus. And it will demonstrate how the Mark and Jesus constructs an open, pluralistic form of discipleship in terms of participating in divine mission and not institutional and not evoking his name. So, it bridges between the problem statement and the proposed solution by clarifying how the researcher intended to address, identify a gap, and what contributions the study aims to make. Claim አልባለን ምን አይነት ኮንትሪቢሽን ለቸርች ሊሆን ይችላል፣ አካዳሚክ ወርክ ሊሆን ይችላል፣ ለሶሳይቲ ሊሆን ይችላል። ኮንትሪቢሽኑን በግልጽ ያስቀምጣል። ፕሮብሌም ስቴትመንት እና ክሌማችንን በደንብ ያስቀምጣል ማለት ነው። this is the rational ሳምፕሉን ስታዩ በደንብ የተለማመዳችሁ ስትሄዱ የሚገባችሁ ነገር ነው የሚሆነው። Okay. The other thing is that research objective. Research objective is simple. Central goal, that in articulating the central goal that a study seeks to achieve and provide a clear framework for addressing the research problem. What is your central goal? So that is your objective. They may be expressed in the form of statement, question, or specific objective. However, the most critical factor is the clarity with which they define the intended outcome in academic and practical of the research. Okay. Research objective you have general objective or you may have a specific objective. So one of the central focus is not putting simply an objective. It must be purposeful. It must have plan to achieve a certain specific target or goal. So ኦብጀክቲቫችን ምንድን ነው? በተለያዩ መልክ ሊገለጥ ይችላል። For example, it may express in the form of statement, question, or specific objective. The research objects that. This is the specific objective. ለምሳሌ what look like the nature of discipleship in the inclusive mission of Jesus? This is the question, and in the form of statement, uh, the nature of the inclusive mission of Jesus needs an investigation. That is a statement form is without question. በኩዌሽን ፎርም ስናስቀምጥ በተለያዩ ፎርሞች ልናስቀምጠው እንችላለን። ለምሳሌ አንድ ምሳሌ እንውሰድ። ለምሳሌ the research will examine how churches in Sidama should minister to polygamous families which joins the church. This is an statement form. The research will attempt to discover the criteria and objectives the editors of the The research will examine how churches in Sidama should minister to polygamous families which join the church. This is a statement form, not the objective. This is a question, so it must be the question. This is a question. This is an objective. So objective ለተለያዩ መልክ መቀመጥ ይችላል ማለት ነው። Statement form, the research will examine how churches in Sidama should minister to polygamous families who join the church. This is statement form. Question, how should churches in Switzerland or Sidama minister to polygamous families which join the church? Objective, the main objective of the study is to determine how churches in Switzerland Sidama should minister to polygamous families which joins the church. This is different description of research objective. For it must be the main task is it must be focused on resolving the identified problem and the research question and the overall purpose of the study, guiding data collection, analysis, and interpretation. Indicative ነው ማለት ነው። ለምሳሌ ፕራክቲካሊ ከተሰሩ ፕሮፖዛሎች ውስጥ አንደኛው Okay. Objective of the study. General objective to examine the role of youth evangelism in select church in Addis Ababa. This is general objective. Specific objective that is derived from that general objective and breaking down that specific components. So specific objective to identify the current role of youth in evangelism, to analyze challenges affecting your participation, to propose strategies for improving your youth engagement. ስትራቴጂም አለው አይደል? መጀመሪያ ላይ ስናስቀምጥ ምን ብለናል? ከታይትላችን ጋር በጣም ቁርኝት ያለው መሆን አለ። ዘ ሮል ኦፍ ዩዝ ኢን ኢቫንጀሊዝም ኬዝ ስተዲ ኦፍ ሰሌክትድ ቸርችስ ኢን አዲስ አበባ። ኦብጀክቲቫችን ምንድነው? ቱ ኤግዛማይን ዘ ሮል ኦፍ ዩዝ ኢን ኢቫንጀሊዝም። ግልጽ ነው ማለት ነው። እዛው ታይትላችን ላይ አለን። ቱ ኤግዛማይን ዘ ሮል ኦፍ ቸርችስ ኢን the role of youth in evangelism in select churches in Addis Ababa. Specific objective to identify the current role of youth in evangelism, to analyze challenges affecting youth participation, to propose strategies for improving youth engagement. ስለዚህ ኦብጀክቲቫችን ግልጽ ነው ማለት ነው። The other unique component of the biblical research is test statement. So, test statement is the central point of argument that a research seeks to defend or prove. So, what is your central claim? You must justify that claim by reason. So, your test statement is simply claim and reason. So, this section is the main pillar of study and provides direct answer or solution to the research question or problem. This statement is usually placed at the end of your introduction and serves as a guiding principle for the entire study. ባጭሩ ቴስት ስቴትመንት ማለት ዲፌንድ የምታደርጉት አርጊውመንት ምንድን ነው? This is your test statement. So, your defendable argument ወይንም አርጊው እያደረጋችሁ ያላችሁት ወይም የተከራከራችሁበት ያለው ሀሳብ ምክንያታዊ አድርጋችሁ ስታቀርቡ ማለት ነው። ስቴትመንት ማለት ስቴትመንት ነው። it is a statement. The statement must have claim and that claim must be justified by reason. So, if you have these two things, test statement is simple. So, test statement means claim plus reason. So, primary characteristics of test statement is that it must be arguable and or else contentable. And so, says that an effective test statement goes beyond simple description and presents a new perspective of interpretation that must be supported by evidence and reasoning. So, test statement serves as a standard by which all evidences and analysis present in the study are measured. በምሳሌ እንመልከት። የስቴትመንት ምን ማለት ነው? Test statement is one sentence This study argues that it must start with this word. This study argues that in Mark 9:38 up to 41, who is the subject of that given sentence? Jesus is the subject of that given passage, delimited passage. So Jesus reframes. If you have been investigating Pauline literature, Paul states that, Paul argues that, Paul something like that. ከክፍሉ ጋር አብሮ የሚሄድ ቃል ነው ተቀመጠ። እዛው ሪፍሬም ነው ያደረገው እዚህ ጋር የቃላት እንትናችንን እንደገና ነው እንዲታይ ያደረገው አይደል? ኢንክሉዥን እና የባውንደሪ ዲሳይፕልሺፕ ባውንደሪ እንደገና ሪዲፋይን አደረገው። ሶ ሪፍሬም ነው ኖት ኢዝ አን አርጊውመንት አይደለም ክፍሉ ላይ ያለው ወይንም ክርክር አይደለም ወይም ትምህርት አይደለም ክፍሉ ስለ ዲሳይፕልሺፕ ባውንደሪ እንደገና ሪፍሬም መሆን ነው የሚነግረን ማለት ነው። So Jesus reframes the boundaries of discipleship by affirming those who act in his name with the kingdom mission and genuine discipleship. Because it was a claim no. Jesus statement no and arguable defendable የሆነ ሐሳብ ነው የተናገረ ያለው ክፍሉ ወይንም አንድ በዚች ሐሳብ ውስጥ ያለችው and Jesus reframes the boundaries of discipleship by affirming those who practice in his name with the kingdom mission as genuine discipleship. His name with the kingdom mission as genuine discipleship. So that this is the reason part. This is so that is the reason part. So that to signify the inclusive nature of Jesus' mission and legitimacy of action in his name. So this one is the reason part. The first part of the sentence is a claim. The second one is a reason. So your statement must be dependable, argumentative መሆን አለበት። አከራካሪ ሐሳብ አንስቶ ፖዚሽን ያለው ዲፌንደብል የሆነ አይዲያ ያለው ያ ዲፌንደብል አይዲያ ደግሞ በሪዝን ሰፖርት መደረግ የሚችል መሆን አለበት ከክፍሉ በመነሳት ማለት ነው። It answers systematically your research question. Your test statement is an answer for your research question. So one of the criteria for the test statement is it must answer your research question. So it must be defendable, argumentative, and a new perspective or interpretation that must be supported by evidence and reasoning. አሁን ዝም ብለን እዚህ ቦታ ላይ ብቻ ታዲያ ይሄ ምን ሪሰርች ያስፈልገዋል? ይሄ እኮ ግልጽ ነገር ነው ልንል አንችልም። ግን ክፍሉን በደንብ ስለዚህ ጉዳይ ስኮላሮች ምን ይላሉ? ስኮላሮች ያላዩበት አንግል የትኛው ነው? ክፍሉ ላይ ሄደን ስንመለከትና ሌሎች ተያያዥ ጽሁፎችን ስናነብ ነው ይሄ ሐሳብ በደንብ ይገባል። ቀለል ያሉኛ ያው የምናውቃቸው ሐሳቦች ነገር ግን በስኮላር ወርልድ አርጊውመንታቲቭ ናቸው። ሶ ያንን አርጊውመንታችሁን ወይንም ያንን ክሌማችሁን በሪዝን ማስደገፍ ሲችሉ ነው ቴስ ስቴትመንት አላችሁ የሚባለው ማለት ነው። ኦኬ ስለዚህ ጉዳይ አሁን ክፍል ይሄንን እዚህ ኤክስፐርት የሆነ ሰው ይሄንን ቢያየው ምን ይላል ማለት ነው? እዚህ ክፍል ላይ እንደዚህ ያላዩትም ብሎ ሌሎች ብዙ የስኮላሮች አይዲያቸውን ሊያነጻጽር ይችላል ማለት ነው። ሪዲፋይን ተደርጓል። የኢንክሉሲቭ ኔቸር ኦፍ ዲሳይፕልሺፕ ሪዲፋይን ሆኗል ብሎ ማለት ምናልባት ለስኮላር ሊወለድ ምን ሊሆን ይችላል ማለት ነው? ኮንትሪቢዩሽን ነው ማለት ነው። ሶ ክፍሉ ሲጠና በደንብ ስኮላር ሊወርድ ላይ ያለውን ሲቹዌሽን ሁሉ በደንብ ሪፍሌክት ማድረግ አለበት። ከእነሱ ጋር ተነጻጽሮ ነው የኛ ሀሳብ ዩኒክ መሆኑ የሚለየው። ዩኒክ ነው፣ ዩኒክ ሀሳብ ነው። ወይም ለስኮላርሊ ወርልድ ወይም ለአካዳሚክ ወርልድ ወይም ለሶሳይቲ ወይም ለቸርች ኮንትሪቢዩት ያደርጋል ተብሎ ዲፌንደብል አርጉመንት ነው ተብሎ ሊያልፍ የሚችለው ክፍሉን በደንብ ኢንዴፕዝ ስናጠና ነው ማለት ነው። ኦኬ Okay, the other part of your research proposal is research question. So the specific direction of your study and the central research question identify what needs to be investigated to solve the problem. The answer should align with the thesis statement. So, ለምሳሌ ይህን ክፍል እጅ ስመለከት what is the nature of genuine discipleship as portrayed in Mark 9:38-41? What is the significance of using Jesus' name within the context of Jesus' inclusive mission? So this is research question must be in alignment with your thesis statement. For example, if you ask your research question, your thesis statement must give the answer. What is the nature of genuine discipleship as portrayed in Mark 9:38-41? This is a question. Jesus reframes the boundaries of discipleship by affirming those who act in his name with the kingdom mission as genuine discipleship. What is that nature? It must be kingdom oriented and missional. To be genuine discipleship, it must have this characteristics. So what is the nature? The nature of genuine discipleship is must have legitimate of an action in his name, or the right exercise of legitimacy, legitimate action in his name. What is the significance of using Jesus' name within the context of Jesus' inclusive mission? So we have the answer within that specific statement. Okay. So ይሄንን ፕራክቲስ አድርጉ። ስቴትመንት ሪሰርች ኩዌሽናቸው አብሮ የሚሄድ ነገር ነው። ሶ ዩር ስፔሲፊክ ዳይሬክሽን ነው ማለት ነው። በመጠየቅ መልክ የምታቀርቡት ነው ማለት ነው። ለምሳሌ ቅድም ያነሳነው በዚህ ላይ ስንሄድ what role do youths currently play in evangelism in selected churches in Addis Ababa? What challenges hinder your participation in evangelism activities? What strategies can enhance youth involvement in evangelism? This is the research question for the former proposal. Okay. Research question have complement plus subject. For example, leaders is a subject, why they leave churches is a complement. Question, why do you leaders leave churches? Leaders is the subject of the sentence is leaders. The reason why they leave the church is a complement. So why do good leaders leave churches? So subject plus complement መሆን አለበት ማለት ነው። So heaven is the subject. What it will be like is what it will be like is the complement. What will life in heaven be like? Is the question. So what will the reason or the complement ማለት ሰብጀክቱን ወይም ኩዌሽኑን ኮምፕሌት የሚያደርግ ማለት ነው። ሪዝን አውት ስናደርግ ማለት ነው። ያንን ሰብጀክት ኦፍ ስተዲ ሪዝን አውት ሲሆን ማለታችን ነው። Psalm is the subject. What are the main teaching of Psalms in 3 up to 8? what messages they convey is the complement. What are the main teachings? The main teaching is the complement. Okay. The other thing is that delimitation and limitation. Limitation and delimitation. Limitation are boundaries the researcher intentionally set to narrow the focus of the study, as we discussed before. For example, in the case of your biblical study, Mark 9:38 up to 41 is your delimitation. You intentionally set a boundaries. Whereas to that of your field research is that in selected churches in Addis Ababa. This is geographical delimitation. Use the reason of delimitation may be different thing, time, energy, and so on. So lack of time, lack of boundary resources or language barriers or identify this clearly increases your credibility of the study. So limitation are boundaries that researcher intentionally set narrows the focus of your study. So according to Gary Smith, these boundaries help the study remain focused, consistent, and manageable. Okay. So delimitation እና ሊሚቴሽናችንን በደንብ clearly understand እናድርግ። delimitation እኛ የገደብናቸው ገደቦች ናቸው። says for example delimitational parameters chosen by the researcher. For example, while the problem of elders who do not know how to preach proper sermon in common is common in the whole of Tanzania. This paper will only study the issue in the Arusha Central Church. ለምሳሌ ማርቆስ ወንጌል ላይ ያለውን ክፍል ዴሊሚት ለማድረግ the study is limited to selected the Addis Ababa ላይ ያለውን ማለት the study is limited to selected Protestant churches in Addis Ababa and focus on youth age 18 up to 35. It doesn't include rural churches or other demographic groups. This delimitation ensures that the available time and resource. Because of available time and resource, the study is delimited to this specific area. So your research area is specifically set or specifically delimited. This is what does that mean, delimitation. Limitation, for example, limitation refers to concrete challenges such as lack of time, lack of library resource, or language barriers. These are limitations. ይሄኛው የሪሰርቻችሁ ሊሚቴሽን የምታስቀምጡበት ቦታ ነው። ሊሚቴሽን ዴሊሚቴሽን ያው ሁለቱም ተመሳሳይነት ያለው ሀሳብ ነው የሚናገሩት። ነገር ግን ዴሊሚቴሽን ስንል ባውንደሪ ማለታችን ነው። ሊሚቴሽን ስንል ውስንነት ማለት ነው። ወሰንና ውስንነት ማለት ነው በአማርኛ። So this is delimitation and limitation. The other thing is that methodology. Okay. ሌላው ሜቶዶሎጂ ነው። What does that mean, methodology? Methodology is the essential part of your research, and that explains the work process followed to achieve the goal of the study. Criticism, theological interpretation, or combination of these. We'll discuss that one. Explain the work process followed to achieve the goal of the study. This is a process you follow to achieve the set goals. Historical analysis, literary criticism, theological interpretation, combination of this. So the methodology must show in detail what kind of data is collected, the way of data collection, and how the analysis is conducted. If you intend to use qualitative participant observation, you must clearly state where and when observation will take place, or if interviews are conducted, the selection and number of participants. If you commit yourself to diachronic approach for the study, examiners will ask whether you really did diachronic study or not. If you promise to exegete key texts, they will check that you did proper exegesis. If you undertake the descriptive survey, did you use proper data collection and analysis techniques? In summary, methodology section serves as blueprint for your research process, ensuring the study has systematic and scholarly foundation. Okay. ምን አይነት ሜተድ ነው የምንጠቀመው ነው ሪሰርች? ለምሳሌ ቅድም ያነሳሁትን ሴሌክቲቭ አዲስ አበባ ቸርቾች ላይ ስላለው